Hey guys, just showing you more cards tonight. We'll finish off this stack, and then once this video is over, what we'll do is we'll show you, no, actually we'll cut it off at that point, and then we will show you a different sport, and wherever it cuts off, that's where we'll say, hey, look, if it's 9 minutes, then the remaining 3 minutes that we did not finish in, as usual, we'll go into the next one. So the next one, instead of being a 12-minute video, it'll be a 15-minute video or whatever. We'll roll into the next one, and we won't stop until we got everything done well. All right. So as you can see, we've already, as I was talking, we've already started showing you some of the cards, and I intend to show you more and more cards until the stack is done, like I just said. And so if you like this video, comment down below, share it with one friend, and subscribe. Oh my gosh. I could make my lunch, but I think I will make my lunch closer to the evening time rather than in the afternoon. Maybe in the nighttime I might make it when I'm going to bed, so that tomorrow I'm totally ready. Oh yeah, I gotta eat. And I can focus on making videos all day long, really speaking. I don't know why, sometimes when I load my videos, it just pauses out of nowhere. And sometimes it even tells you it's gonna pause. I don't know if it's the YouTube algorithm or someone just hacking the system and pausing it. I'd be so annoyed if it's the latter. At least if it's the YouTube algorithm, I can live with that. Because that's not something like, well, what the heck is not some, that's supposed to happen. Both are not in my control, but at least not much in my control. But at least the algorithm is supposed to happen. But the hacking, that's not supposed to happen. Who knows, maybe this might be a longer video than 2 videos ago. Maybe it's still uploading, I don't know. So I think 16 plus 4 is 20, plus 3 is 23. So this should be posted on the 23rd of August. So you guys are in August and I'm in June. But remember, there are some videos where I'm in June and you guys were in December, so quite ahead of schedule when it comes to content creation. Maybe this time when I come home, I'll eat pretty many. Eat somewhere closer to home. Tom Brady. Hopefully I can get to about I believe 2,400 watch time hours by the end of the month. I am on pace to crush or at least beat the 4,000 watch time hours. But it's been a long, grueling battle upwards. Plus, then I need subscribers. My goodness, I don't have. I haven't. I want to do courses, but I don't know anything that I can teach or even put in the affiliate links in the bottom. That seems to be getting your attention enough to earn some money. So if you can join with a join button or something like that, marketing. That's why. That's why I need you to share my content with. Like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. How about I do this for the rest of the video? Subscribe, 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 subscribe. In the next video, I'll also do that, but from start to finish. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. I might put all these extra cases that I have in one of those boxes, if at the very end, I feel like it works. It's back to subscribe, 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 subscribe. Subscribe, 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 subscribe. Alright. If you enjoyed that video, like, comment, subscribe, share with one friend or more. So 1.5 minutes more. So the next one will be about 13.5 minutes. So we'll round up to about 14 minutes for the next one.